Disclaimer: this story is a dramatized account inspired by true events. Names, places, and certain details have been changed to protect privacy. The story contains mature themes of relationships and infidelity, intended for adult audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. This content is for storytelling and entertainment purposes only. I remember that weekend as if it had been carved into my memory with a knife, sharp, painful, impossible to erase. My name is Daniel, I'm 34, and at that time I thought I had a steady marriage. My wife, Laura, was 3 years younger than me. We had been together long enough to fall into routines, but not so long that I thought passion had died. That's why, when she suggested we take a weekend trip to a small, quiet hotel just outside the city, I thought it was a beautiful idea. Just the two of us, she said with a smile. I had no reason not to believe her. The drive was calm, the kind of road trip where the music hums in the background and the silence between you feels safe. But I couldn't ignore one thing. Laura kept glancing at her phone, typing quickly, then turning it face down on her lap. I told myself not to overthink. Maybe it was work, maybe a friend. But deep inside, a voice whispered that something wasn't right. When we arrived at the hotel, it looked almost cinematic: rustic wood, dimly lit hallways, the faint smell of coffee and rain in the air. We checked into a room with a view of the courtyard, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe this was exactly what we needed. Time away, just us, to remember why we started. Yet even in that first hour, I noticed Laura was restless. She smiled at me, kissed me, but her eyes seemed distracted. Like she was waiting for something or someone. At dinner in the hotel's small restaurant, I tried to spark conversation, talking about old memories, our future plans. She laughed politely, but her attention always seemed to drift. I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe my insecurities were painting shadows where there was only light. But then, as we walked back to the room, she held my hand tighter than usual. Almost like she was trying to reassure me or prepare me. Inside the room, she poured us both a glass of wine, her hands trembling slightly as she set the bottle down. She leaned against the window, staring at the rain dripping down the glass, and said softly, "This weekend, I just want us to try something different." Her voice carried weight, a hidden meaning I couldn't quite understand yet. I smiled, pretending to be at ease, but a knot had already formed in my stomach. I didn't know it then, but that night was not going to be the escape I thought it would be. Instead, it would be the beginning of the end, an unraveling of everything I believed about love, loyalty, and trust. It was around 8 o'clock when Laura's phone buzzed again. She picked it up quickly, glanced at the screen, then stood and said, "I'll be right back." I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was taking a call in the hallway for privacy. But 10 minutes passed, then 15. When the door finally opened, she wasn't alone. A man walked in behind her, wheeling a small suitcase. He looked to be about my age, maybe 33. He had a casual confidence about him, slim build, clean-shaven, with that easy smile people use when they know they don't need to introduce themselves. Laura, on the other hand, looked nervous, though she tried to mask it with a cheerful tone. "Daniel, this is Chris," she said quickly. "He's a friend. He's just staying for one night. The hotel was overbooked, and he needed a place." I told him it's fine. Her words spilled out like a rehearsed script, one she had practiced, but didn't expect to deliver in front of me. I stared at her, then at him. Chris extended his hand casually, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I shook it out of politeness, but my chest was already tightening. A friend? Staying the night? In our room? I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but the way Laura looked at me, pleading, almost warning, made me swallow my questions. "Sure," I muttered, though my voice betrayed my discomfort. Dinner that night was surreal. The three of us sat together in the small restaurant, our table by the window glowing in the soft light of a single candle. I tried to eat, but every bite felt heavy in my mouth. Chris and Laura exchanged glances I couldn't quite decipher. Not overtly intimate, but familiar. They shared inside jokes I wasn't part of, subtle touches on the arm, laughter that seemed rehearsed. I sat there, watching them, my fork frozen halfway to my plate. To anyone else, We must have looked like friends enjoying a casual evening. But inside, I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. My wife's attention lingered on Chris more than it lingered on me, and every glance between them carved another crack in my trust. When we returned to the room, I braced myself for what might come. Chris set his suitcase neatly in the corner, his posture relaxed, his confidence unshaken. Laura busied herself with arranging the wine glasses, pretending everything was normal. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should confront her right then and there. But the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. None of us spoke about the strangeness of the situation. None of us acknowledged the storm brewing just beneath the surface. That night, as I closed my eyes, one thought echoed in my head: this was no accident. His presence wasn't coincidence. Whatever Laura had planned, I was already caught in the middle of it. The air in the hotel room grew heavier with every passing hour. Chris had made himself comfortable, sitting on the armchair with a glass of wine, while Laura moved around the room nervously, avoiding my eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, my chest tight, my thoughts spiraling. I kept asking myself, what was happening here? Why was she doing this? Finally, Laura broke the silence. She set her glass down, sat next to me, and placed her hand gently on mine. "Daniel," she whispered, "I need to ask you something, but I don't want you to get angry." Her voice trembled, though her eyes held a strange determination. I tried to smile, to hide my unease. "What is it?" I asked. She glanced quickly at Chris, then back at me. Her fingers squeezed mine tighter. "I want us to try something different tonight. Something new. Something I think could bring us closer." My stomach dropped. I didn't like where this was going, but I let her continue. Laura leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear. "Only if you take start," she whispered, the words slipping out like a secret she'd been holding back for too long. At first, I didn't understand. I laughed nervously, pulling back. "What do you mean? Take start with what?" Her eyes started toward Chris again. The meaning settled on me slowly, like a wave pulling me under. My heart pounded, my skin went cold. She wasn't talking about some innocent game. She was suggesting something far more dangerous, something that crossed the boundaries of everything I thought our marriage stood for. I looked at Chris. He said nothing, just sipped his wine, watching me with calm, expectant eyes. He wasn't surprised. He knew exactly what she was asking of me. "Laura," I said, my voice shaking, "are you serious right now? You want me to, start something like that? With him here?" She bit her lip, her eyes wet with a mix of fear and excitement. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "It doesn't have to be wrong. If you take start, if you're part of it, then it's not betrayal. It's something we do together." Her logic twisted in my ears. She was trying to dress up infidelity as intimacy, trying to make the unthinkable sound like a solution. I wanted to scream, to storm out of the room, but my body wouldn't move. Instead, I sat there, frozen, caught between anger and disbelief. The woman I loved was offering me a poisoned choice: join in her fantasy, or be left behind as she chased it without me. Chris remained silent, his presence like a shadow looming over us both. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a spontaneous idea. This was something they had discussed, maybe even planned. And me? I was just the last piece of the puzzle. The minutes after her proposal stretched endlessly, as if time itself wanted me to decide whether I would shatter or bend. I stared at the wine glass in my hand, swirling the dark liquid, trying to drown out the pounding in my chest. Laura sat close, her hand still on mine, waiting. Chris remained in the armchair, silent, yet present enough to make my skin crawl. The room had turned into a cage, and I was the cornered animal. I wanted to say no. Everything inside me screamed it. My marriage vows, my pride, my dignity, they all told me to walk out that door. But then I looked at Laura. Her eyes were pleading, shimmering with a desperation I had never seen before. She wasn't just suggesting, she was begging me. And beneath that plea was a threat I couldn't ignore. If I refused, she would still find a way to do this, with or without me. The silence pressed down like a weight. I took a shaky breath, trying to find words. "Laura, this isn't us," I said quietly. "I don't even know what you're asking me to do." You're asking me to start something I don't believe in. She leaned closer, her lips brushing my ear. If you start, Daniel, then you're not losing me. We're sharing. We're together. But if you refuse, she trailed off, her eyes flickering toward Chris. She didn't finish her sentence, but I understood perfectly. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. My hand trembled as I set the wine glass down. Chris shifted slightly in his seat, his calmness unnerving, as if he already knew how this would play out. I wanted to lash out at him, to throw him out of the room, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Instead, I sat in paralysis, torn between two unbearable choices. The thought of participating felt like betraying myself, but the thought of refusing felt like losing Laura forever. And that, in its own way, was a deeper betrayal. Hours seemed to pass in that tension, though it was probably only minutes. Laura touched my cheek gently, as if to soothe me, but her touch burned. "Just trust me," she whispered. "Once you take start, it won't feel wrong. I promise." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sight of Chris, trying to remember the Laura I married, the woman who once held my hand with sincerity, not manipulation. But every time I thought of walking away, I saw her slipping further from me, her loyalty already elsewhere. Finally, with a heavy sigh, I nodded faintly. Not out of desire, not out of conviction, but out of fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of facing the truth I already knew, that she was no longer fully mine. And as I gave that reluctant nod, I felt something inside me crack, a fracture that could never be healed. The moment after I nodded, the air shifted. Laura's shoulders relaxed, and she exhaled like she had been holding her breath all night. Chris didn't smile, didn't gloat, he just leaned back in the armchair, waiting with that same calm expression. I had never felt so small, so cornered, yet so strangely detached, as though I was watching the scene from outside my own body. Laura guided me gently, her hands soft but insistent. It wasn't affection, it was control, a push toward the inevitable. My mind screamed stop, but my body moved because the silence between us demanded it. She wanted me to take start, and I did, not out of passion but out of a desperate need to keep her close. The first few moments were clumsy, surreal. My heart hammered in my chest, my throat dry. I could feel Chris watching, patient, calculating. I wanted to block him out, to pretend he wasn't there, but his presence pressed against me like a weight I couldn't shake. And then it happened. Laura leaned away from me and turned toward him. That was the moment I realized I was no longer part of her world. Her laughter, her touches, the spark in her eyes, none of it was meant for me anymore. She had orchestrated everything, and I was nothing more than a prop in her fantasy. I sat there, frozen, watching as she gave him the kind of attention she used to give me. It was subtle at first, but soon it was undeniable. The way her hand lingered on his arm, the way her eyes locked onto his, it was as if I had vanished from the room. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. I tried to remind myself that I had agreed, that I had nodded, that I had taken start. But the truth was clear now. This wasn't about us experimenting together. This wasn't about saving our marriage. It was about her and Chris, and I was the excuse she needed to justify it. In that moment, shame washed over me. Shame for allowing it, shame for thinking I could control it, shame for betraying myself just to hold on to something that was already gone. Every second that passed felt like a knife twisting deeper. I turned away, staring at the rain beating against the window. Each drop blurred into the next, a storm outside that mirrored the storm inside me. Behind me, I could hear them, soft whispers, laughter, the sound of two people connecting in a way that no longer included me. I realized then that I hadn't crossed the line. The line had been crossed long before, the moment Laura invited him into our lives. I was just the last to see it. And in that haunting silence, I understood. I wasn't saving my marriage. I was watching it die. Morning came quietly, without warning, as if the night had slipped away unnoticed. I woke up to the faint light of dawn seeping through the curtains. The room smelled of wine and something heavier, like the aftermath of a storm. Laura lay beside me, her breathing steady, peaceful, as though nothing unusual had happened. For a moment, I almost believed it was a normal morning. But then my eyes shifted to the other side of the room. Chris's suitcase was gone. The chair where he had sat the night before was empty, the cushion indented, the silence around it loud. He had left without a word, without even acknowledging me. His absence made everything worse, because it proved what I feared most. He hadn't needed to stay. He had only come for her, and once he had gotten what he wanted, he vanished. I sat up slowly, my body heavy, my mind clouded. Laura stirred, then smiled faintly, as though waking up after an ordinary night. "Good morning," she whispered, kissing my shoulder casually before sliding out of bed. Her tone was light, cheerful even. At breakfast in the hotel restaurant, she ordered pancakes, coffee, and chatted about the weather, the hotel decor, even plans for the afternoon. She talked about everything except last night. I sat across from her, silent, my fork untouched, the food before me growing cold. I kept waiting for her to mention it, to acknowledge what had happened, but she never did. Her avoidance cut deeper than the act itself. It was as if she wanted to erase it, to pretend it hadn't happened, as if my pain didn't matter. I studied her face as she sipped her coffee, laughing at something the waiter said, and I realized she wasn't struggling. She wasn't guilty. She was free. Inside, I was crumbling. My chest burned with humiliation. I felt like a ghost, invisible at my own table. Every smile she gave me felt hollow, like a mask she wore out of habit. My mind replayed the night in fragments, her laughter with Chris, her eyes locked on his, my own silence, as I let it happen. When she finally noticed my quiet, she touched my hand lightly. "You're being too serious," she said, almost teasing. "We're supposed to enjoy this weekend. Forget about everything else." Forget? How could I forget? The image of her with him was carved into me, unshakable. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to make her feel the pain tearing me apart. But my voice wouldn't come. All I managed was a hollow nod, my eyes fixed on the untouched plate in front of me. That morning taught me something I wasn't ready to face. Betrayal doesn't always come with arguments, tears, or confessions. Sometimes it comes with silence, with smiles over coffee, with the cruel pretense that nothing has changed, when in truth, everything has. And as Laura laughed lightly at some meaningless detail, I realized I wasn't her husband anymore. I was just the man who let it happen. The silence between us followed me long after that breakfast. Every step back to the hotel room felt heavier, like I was dragging the weight of my own cowardice. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I had spent the night suffocating in shame and the morning drowning in pretense. I needed answers, or at the very least, the truth from her lips. When we entered the room, Laura began packing casually, humming to herself as if everything was normal. That small act, her pretending, was what finally broke me. "Laura," I said firmly, my voice cracking from the pressure I'd been bottling up. "What happened last night, was that the first time?" She froze. The humming stopped, and she stood still, her back to me. Slowly she turned, her face pale, her eyes blinking quickly as if searching for the right lie. But then, with a sigh, she sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumping. "No," she whispered. The word hit me harder than I thought possible. I felt my knees weaken, my chest hollow out. I had been holding onto a thin thread of denial, hoping last night was some reckless, one-time mistake. But the truth was darker. It had been happening long before I ever knew. "How long?" I asked, my voice sharp now. "Months," she admitted, barely meeting my eyes. "Since spring. We've been talking, meeting sometimes." "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Daniel, I swear. I thought if I brought you into it, if you were part of it, then maybe it wouldn't be betrayal. Maybe it could be something new for us." Her words twisted my stomach. I stared at her, stunned at the absurdity of her reasoning. She had justified her infidelity by trying to paint it as inclusion, as if dragging me into her lies would make it less of a betrayal. "You thought this would make it better?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You thought humiliating me, bringing him into our room, would save us?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or frustration. "I didn't want to lose you," she said softly. "I thought if I shared it with you, it wouldn't feel like cheating." I thought, "Stop," I cut her off. My hands trembled, my vision blurred with anger and disbelief. You didn't think about me at all. You thought about yourself, about your fantasy, about him. You've been lying for months, and now you want me to accept it as if it's love." The room fell into a heavy silence. Laura looked down, her tears finally spilling. For once, she had no defense, no excuse. I turned away, staring at the rain streaking down the window. In that reflection, I saw a man I barely recognized, broken, betrayed, but finally awake. Our marriage wasn't damaged. It wasn't struggling. It was gone. We drove back home that afternoon in silence. The rain followed us, tapping against the windshield like a cruel reminder of the storm inside me. Laura sat in the passenger seat, scrolling on her phone as though nothing had changed, while I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every mile we covered put more distance between us, not less. The road stretched endlessly, but the marriage I thought I had was already behind me. At home, she unpacked casually, humming again, slipping into her daily routines like a woman untouched by guilt. I watched her move around the house we had built together, the walls now feeling like strangers to me. How could everything look the same when everything had changed? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail, the awkward dinner, the heavy silence, her whisper in my ear, "Only if you take start." Those words haunted me. They weren't an invitation. They were a manipulation, a way to make her betrayal feel like it had my blessing. I thought back on the months leading up to it. The late-night texts she brushed off as work. The sudden distance between us. The way her laughter had started sounding forced when she was with me, but effortless when she was on her phone. I had ignored the signs, convinced myself love was stronger than suspicion. But love, I realized, doesn't survive lies. In the days that followed, Laura tried to act as though nothing had happened. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, asked about my day in the evenings, even sat beside me on the couch as though she belonged there. But I couldn't look at her without seeing him, without remembering the hotel room, without feeling the crack inside me widen. And so, I stopped trying. I stopped pretending. I stopped holding on to something that no longer existed. The day I told her I was leaving, she cried, not out of love, but out of fear of losing her comfort. She begged, promised to stop, promised to change. But promises mean nothing when the truth has already burned the bridge. Now, when I look back, I don't see that weekend as the end of my marriage. I see it as the moment I woke up. The moment I realized that infidelity isn't always hidden in shadows and lies. Sometimes it happens right in front of you, disguised as an invitation, dressed as something new. But betrayal is betrayal, whether it's whispered in secret or spoken aloud. That night in the hotel, there were 3 of us. But in reality, I was completely alone. And in that loneliness, I finally found the truth. Sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to walk away. 3.